I want to tell you about a client I worked with for almost a year. She was the director at a well-known company, and before that, another recognizable retail business. She had built her career through genuine results, through a reputation that preceded her, through bosses who referred her because they had seen what she could do, and a few times they asked her to come with them at new companies so she could be on those transition teams. By every external measure, she was a very impactful leader. And she was convinced for most of the year we worked together that she was failing. She had valid reasons to think this too, and it wasn't because of imposter syndrome. She was deeply, persistently convinced that something fundamental was missing in her, that the way she naturally led, the way she naturally communicated, the way she naturally showed up at work was somehow not enough for the work environment she was in at that moment, that her colleagues who were more comfortable with the performance of leadership had something she didn't, and that the gap between who she was and who she thought she needed to be was going to catch up with her eventually. That was a miscalculation on her part about what was actually happening around her. Here's what was actually happening. Well, she was carrying this internalized weight. The organization was rebuilding their department, and over the years, she had been caught up in repeated and rapid changes of strategic direction, changes with her supervisor. And I think she had 4 new supervisors over 2 years and her team around her. She was getting reassigned to new teams repeatedly, which didn't give her much opportunity to build trust or even build those teams herself. Now, she felt like she was failing because rapid change was not her comfort zone, but the people around her kept putting her in these situations because she was steady and delivered in difficult moments. Her reputation was actually rising, but she believed she was barely treading water, and her nervous system was in overdrive. So this gap between what she was experiencing internally and what was actually happening around her is what this video is about. She's not my only client to experience this either. It has happened a few times. She is, in my experience, one of the most common profiles I see in senior leaders who come to coaching convinced they are broken. And the work we did together had almost nothing to do with fixing what she thought was wrong. It had everything to do with helping her see what was actually right in front of her, and then building the conditions that let the overwhelm settle down. I'm Christina Holloway. For over 25 years, I've coached senior leaders at organizations like Google, GE, and Spotify to architect their authority and navigate the high-stakes politics of the Fortune 500. On this channel, I show you how to recognize the power plays hiding in plain sight and how to communicate with a presence that demands a seat at the table. This is the final video in July's Self-Aware Leader series, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge one thing. Everything we've built this month has been pointing toward one question. What if the thing you've been convinced is your weakness is actually what's been driving your success all along? That's where we're going today. All right, so let's get started. Let me tell you what I mean when I say a high performer disappears. So it's not a dramatic exit or even a public failure. What I'm talking about is not a big visible thing. The high performers I'm talking about disappear internally. There's a conflict about what they're actually producing and what they believe about themselves. And this happens when we have a misunderstanding about the nuances of leadership. And without question, the people above you are always looking at the thing you cannot see as the way you are succeeding. Confusing, right? Well, it is confusing and can be disorienting to feel like you're struggling while others keep praising your leadership genius. So these high performers shrink away because the voice in their head is telling them that they're not succeeding in some traditional way that they're caught up in. This type of siloed thinking takes hold. These high performers have decided that what they have to say isn't sophisticated enough, political enough, visible enough for these top leaders who are paying attention. They deliver flawlessly on the work in front of them and become invisible on the strategic conversations that would move them forward. They start to believe that they are missing a leadership strength. They work on being more visible. They work on being more assertive. They work on being more comfortable with self-promotion. They work on being more willing to play the political game. And many times they exhaust themselves trying and then conclude that they simply don't have what it takes. Here's the thing, and this is important. When I debrief the Hogan assessment, there are scores for power, competitiveness, business acumen, and drive. There are people with high scores who acknowledge that those things at work are very important to them. And then there are people with very low scores in those areas who tell me, oh, well, I guess I'm just not built for leadership. And guess what? They are at the top or near the top of organizations. And they will tell me repeatedly, yeah, I never understood how I got here. Remember this. The leader who doesn't perform for recognition tends to build something more valuable than visibility. They build trust. And deep down, these people know that trust is their most valuable currency. And when you start adding more and more factors like rapid change, they get lost because the trust they build so effortlessly becomes harder and harder to establish in a rapidly changing environment. Except leadership teams can see it, and they put these people there for a reason. If you are currently struggling with understanding what others see in you in terms of leadership strengths, and you feel like you're constantly failing forward without being able to resolve what others expect from you, then let's start here. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of what you think leadership is versus what other people above you see as a complex combination of strengths that work in different environments. That's a specific and genuinely rare capability that most organizations desperately need and chronically undervalue because, and I know you've seen this, they're too busy promoting the people who are best at looking like leaders to notice the ones who are actually being leaders. My client had built her entire career on exactly that complex leadership capability, director level, always referred, always promoted, a network of people who had seen her work up close and wanted her in their orbit again. And she spent a year convinced it wasn't enough when things got tough. That's what disappearing looks like from the inside, an absence of belief or recognition in the capability you actually have, and that it works or it's working even in really tough situations. So let me show you what that capability looks like in the assessment results. I want to share a Hogan profile with you, and I want you to look at it the way most people would look at it when they see it for the first time, before the debrief. We've got a mischievous at 3. We have an imaginative at 2. We have a colorful at 8. We have a skeptical at 8. Extremely low scores. If you've been following this series, you already know what those scales mean. Mischievous concerns charm, risk-taking, and adaptability to changing social situations. Imaginative concerns creative and abstract thinking. Colorful concerns presence, performance, and the ability to command attention in a room. Skeptical concerns political awareness, right? The ability to read who has the power, who has the agenda, and what's exactly happening underneath the surface of an organization. All 4 of those scores are in the single digits or barely above them. Now, add diligent at 88, hardworking, detail-oriented, high standards for herself and everyone around her. The scale we spent an entire video on earlier this month, and the one that at high scores can tip into perfectionism and micromanagement when the environment gets hard enough. If you read that profile without context, without knowing anything about the person it belongs to, you might draw a specific set of conclusions. This person probably struggles with political environments. They may have difficulty adapting their style when the situation changes. They may not be particularly visible in high-stakes meetings. They may not read organizational dynamics, especially quickly, and under pressure, they may retreat into the work itself, delivering flawlessly at the execution level while becoming harder to see at the strategic one. That's a reasonable read of those numbers, and it's almost entirely wrong about what her career actually produced. Mischievous at 3 means she has no hidden agenda. What you see is what you get. In a world full of people who are performing, positioning, and managing impressions, that transparency is disarming. People trust her immediately because there's nothing to read through. Imaginative at 2 means she thinks in concrete, practical, implementable terms. She doesn't get lost in abstract possibilities or theoretical frameworks. She sees what's in front of her and she figures out how to move it forward. In environments full of visionaries who can't execute, that is not a limitation. That's the thinking that actually gets things done. Colorful at 8 means she doesn't need the spotlight. She doesn't seek recognition. She's not an exhausting presence. And paradoxically, the people who work with her most closely, the bosses who refer her, the colleagues who trust her, often describe her as one of the most memorable leaders they've worked with because she delivered. And someone who actually delivered without the ego attached to it turned out to be remarkably durable. Skeptical at 8 means she trusts people. She assumes good intentions. She doesn't spend organizational energy managing suspicion or protecting against perceived threats. In the right environment, one where the people around her are genuinely trustworthy, that's an enormous asset. It frees her to focus entirely on the work. And diligent at 88, that is not a high risk area. It is a moderate risk area. It means that when she says she'll do something, it gets done to a high standard on time and without drama. Now, where did she struggle? She struggled when the work environment stopped being trustworthy, when her team included people who didn't respect her approach. She struggled when her bosses rotated in and out quickly. She struggled anywhere where she needed to show up politically savvy around people she didn't know very well. She was in a very stressful moment, and that felt risky to her and her career development. I'm going to come back to that. It's our relationship with risk that is foundational to all this work. And our coaching work was about 2 things. First, helping her see the difference between genuine limitation and an environment mismatch. And second, helping her find her voice to ask for what she needed. She was starting to question her own judgment. She moved 5 people out of her team. She rebuilt it with people who respected her approach. Her new boss became her strongest advocate. And that year, that felt like the hardest of her professional life, turned out to be quite rewarding. Keep in mind, she didn't change. We realigned her professional environment, and that made all the difference. So we've spent 4 weeks looking inward. It's the habits that run on autopilot. It's the triggers that prompt us to respond in a surprising way. It's the superpowers that surface in specific conditions that allow us to succeed. And today, it's the assumptions that make us see limitations but turn out to be something valuable after all. And underneath all of that, there is one thread that connects them: our relationship with risk. So we need to define risk. Many times we will look at risk as something to either embrace, skydiving, parasailing, rock climbing, or something to avoid, falling down the mountain, getting hurt. In a work environment, that's not it. It's about managing risk and how comfortable you feel in uncertain environments. Risk is everywhere, in every decision. There are some people who navigate risk well. They are fine with the unknown. It's not that they seek it out and thrive there. It's that when it arrives, they are calm and understand what decision-making in vague circumstances needs, and they are comfortable with it. So I use an analogy with clients when I'm talking about this. Managing risk looks like this. Imagine you're standing on a dock and you need to take your boat across the water to the other side. You've made this crossing before. You know the water. You tell the people, don't worry. I've done this before and we'll be fine. And they trust you and they join you. Then a fog rolls in. So what happens next will tell you something fundamental about your relationship with risk. And in my experience, there are 3 distinct responses. The first response is to get louder. Some people look at the fog and decide the answer is more confidence, more presence, more performance of certainty. They tell everyone on the boat that they've handled worse than this. They project fearlessness, sometimes genuinely, but sometimes because showing uncertainty, no matter how they feel, to them is more dangerous than the fog itself. These are the people that front load confidence and trust that high energy will carry them through. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it backfires. The second response is to navigate. People who manage risk well will look at the fog and reach for their compass. Don't worry, everyone. There's fog, yes, but I also have the tools necessary to get us to the other side safely. Okay, that I can go along with. They slow down in reduced visibility. They have enough self-awareness to evaluate the situation and enough range to adjust their approach accordingly. They don't pretend the fog isn't there, and they don't freeze because of it. They navigate through it with the tools they've developed and the experience they've built. This is someone who manages risk very well. The third response is to stay on the dock. Now, staying on the dock is not always the wrong choice. Sometimes the crossing genuinely isn't worth the risk. Sometimes the wisest thing a leader can do is say, not yet, not like this, not without better conditions. But sometimes, and this is what my client was doing, staying on the dock is not a strategic choice, it's a habit. A pattern of waiting for conditions that feel safe enough before committing to the crossing, of looking at the fog and concluding without fully examining the evidence that the crossing isn't possible, that you don't have what it takes to navigate it, even if it's a light fog. So for my client, it looked like her knowing that she needed to make this journey, but that she was set up to fail because she believed she was stuck with the tools in front of her. If you need a compass, ask for one. If you need a team better aligned to the strategic direction you've been tasked with, make some changes. And I know we can't always do that, but this client could do it, and she wasn't doing it. Pick your head up and look around. To be strategic is to figure out what you need to succeed in any given assignment and reconcile what you have in front of you versus what you really need. Then negotiate. Understand how to build or gravitate towards an environment that will support your efforts and your unique leadership style. It doesn't matter if you can't make any of those changes right now. Start thinking about it. What's one thing that you could change that would make this less overwhelming? What would happen if you change the word overwhelming to risk? If you see yourself disappearing or trying to make decisions based on smaller and smaller options in front of you, then you've gotten yourself into a type of limiting thinking that's clouded by your relationship with risk. Here's what I want you to take from this. Your relationship with risk is not fixed. It's not determined by scores in a personality assessment or the sum of every difficult professional experience you've been through. It is shaped by those things significantly, but it is not determined by them. What the self-awareness work we've done this month actually gives you is information about whether the story you're telling yourself about your limitations is actually true, or whether it's a habit that developed in a work environment that asked for something you weren't really ready to provide, and you've been shrinking in that limited environment ever since. My client and I worked together for a year. A lot of that work was about me challenging her limited thinking until she, broke through that fixed mindset. She said multiple times that it felt like the walls were closing around her. That's hard. It's hard to navigate that. On a final note, here's what I want you to take from this month. When we look inward, what do we see? A lot of flaws, if we're honest, but also a lot of potential. This isn't about overcoming. It's about evolving. Who are you when the environment gets hard? And is the story you're telling yourself about that person actually true? Spoiler alert, no, it's not. The stories we tell ourselves are rarely impartial, and we are often much harder on ourselves than we need to be. And yes, that comes from 25 years of people telling me how horrible a situation is, only to find out it's workable with the right tools and the right understanding of the risk involved. All right, so that's it for my video on risk management and what it really means to disappear when things get tough. If this month landed for you, if something clicked that had been sitting just out of reach, I want to hear about it in the comments below. Tell me what your relationship with risk is and how it's affected your ability to succeed at work, because this community is exactly where that conversation belongs. Don't forget, my free communication toolkit is linked in the description below. And if you're interested in understanding your own profile, the Hogan Leadership Blueprint is linked there as well. It starts with a 20-minute discovery call. And remember, the next time you find yourself standing on the dock, watching the fog roll in, convinced that you don't have what it takes to make that crossing, ask yourself whether that's actually true or whether you've just been waiting for permission. Sit with that and then take action. I'm Christina Holloway. Thank you for an incredible month, and I'll see you in August. Bye.